In the 14th chapter of the Gospel of St. John, we hear Jesus say, "If you love me, you will keep my commandments." And when we hear that, perhaps we tend to think mainly of the 10 Commandments that we have been taught and learned to obey. And those are clearly from God, and thinking that would not be incorrect. But sometimes we forget that in the course of his public ministry, Jesus gave other commandments to his disciples. And in this passage, it may well be to these to which he is actually making reference in particular. Indeed, in St. John's account of the Last Supper, Jesus gave what he himself termed the new commandment, that as his followers, we are to love one another as he himself loved us. Those original disciples were about to learn the extent of his love, as the very next day, Jesus willingly laid down his life on the cross for them and for all who would follow them down through the ages in order to gain our salvation. The love that Jesus commands, then, is not a hearts and flowers kind of love, but it's one so pure as to be willing to endure the suffering of sacrifice if necessary for the good of others. Therefore, it's an unconditional brand of love, not so very easy to attain and quite harder at times to live. Yet there was an additional commandment given by Jesus at the Last Supper, as recorded in all the synoptic Gospels, when after taking, blessing, and sharing the bread, which he called his body, and then the wine, which he called his blood, he gave this commandment, not suggestion: do this in memory of me. This is not some pious sentiment. It is a commandment, and it is given for a reason, which is made clear in the passage from the 6th chapter of St. John that we have just heard proclaimed today, where Jesus says, "Unless you eat of the flesh of the Son of Man and drink his blood, you do not have life within you." Indeed, without celebrating and partaking of the Eucharist that Jesus has given to us as his church at the Last Supper, we will not have life within us. Well, we might reason that we know plenty of people who don't regularly receive communion, and they're as alive as you or me. But it's not physical or biological life to which Jesus refers. It is that life that is love. The love that imitates that of Jesus. The love that saves others and ourselves. This is the perfection of love. And while it isn't absolutely impossible to attain on our own, it is quite difficult to do so as fallen human beings whose default drive since the sin of our first parents tends to be concern first and foremost for me, myself, and I, rather than others. We need divine help, and that is what Jesus has freely given us as he left us his very self, his body, blood, soul, and divinity in the sacrament of the altar, the Eucharist. Indeed, pure love is the life of God, as we recalled last Sunday on the Feast of the Holy Trinity. And pure love will therefore be the life of the heavenly abode of God, which we should all desire to see one day and enjoy forever. The road there is that of unconditional, self-sacrificing love. and it's a very difficult road to walk. Yet just as those Israelites on their way to the promised land were fed by manna as bread from heaven, so now Jesus assures us we have the true bread from heaven, Jesus himself, offering his body and blood to us as food for our journey through the challenges of life to God's eternal kingdom, where love will be citizenship's primary requirement. That is why Jesus tells us clearly that he is the bread for us to eat if we are to live forever. Today, we well know, sadly, that there are those among our fellow Catholics whom should know much better, but are rather indifferent to the Eucharist, present at its celebration quite infrequently, and receiving it seldom, and maybe then even all too casually. And there are whole denominations of those who would call themselves Christians who have really little or no place for the worship of the Eucharist and its reception in their gatherings. Ironically, there are those who would call themselves biblical Christians and tell us as Catholics that we are not, even when the three synoptic Gospels contain direct references to the Eucharist, and this 6th chapter of the 4th Gospel, known as the Bread of Life Discourse, is devoted to it, and the rest of the 4th Gospel contains clear allusions to the Eucharist, all of which combine to tell us that it must be central in the life of any who would want to claim they are followers of Jesus Christ. One of those allusions is found in the 14th chapter of St. John, where, continuing where we started, Jesus said, "If you love me, you will keep my commandments, and my Father will love you, and we will come to you and make our home within you." So we rightly conclude that this divine indwelling is accomplished mainly through the sacrament of the Holy Eucharist. Indeed, if we do obey the Lord's command, "Do this in memory of me," he will live within us and empower us with the divine life that is his love as we come to celebrate Mass and receive communion each Sunday. Therefore, except for reasons of illness, infirmity, emergency, or complete impossibility, let that be our faithful habit as Christians each week on this day, which we should never forget is rightly called the Lord's Day. And let us encourage others whom we love, especially if they have fallen out of practice, to do the very same. An hour each week to worship and receive communion is a very small commitment to make in light of the promise of eternity. So let us never forget what Jesus has commanded, and more importantly, why, as we trust every word he utters is truth, that whoever eats this bread will live forever. So now, with hearts full of awe and gratitude at so great a gift, let us continue our celebration this morning, confident that the bread and wine we will consecrate here and consume, simple as it may appear, is actually the risen Christ himself, thus nothing less than the food of immortality.